Okay, welcome to another week of Ask a Scientist, and I'm your host, Dr. Tom Kennedy. Well, every week we have this class on biodiversity, and as part of their participation, rather than having them just show up and like, okay, I'm here, I get some points, each week I say, hey, ask me a question and write it down. So I'm going to ask some questions, or I'm going to answer some questions that the students had during this week. And they're pretty good. I mean, they keep coming up with really good questions. And if anybody happens to pop on the video here, shoot me a question and I'll answer it too. But I kind of not so randomly chose these questions this week. I did choose a few of them and some of my favorites. And one of them was, what is your favorite eon and why? Well, that answer is absolutely the Phanerozoic eon. And here's why. There are four eons to the Earth, and I would love to have seen the Earth in the Hadean, the Archean, or the Proterozoic, but I really like the Phanerozoic eon that started about 542 million years ago and ran to present. The reason why I like the Phanerozoic eon so much is because this is the eon of the Earth where we've had visible life. Life has become just everywhere and has diversified so much. And before the Phanerozoic eon 542 million years ago, there was life on Earth, but it was largely single-celled for billions of years. And I personally really like animal life. And the next question is, this is pretty cool. What setting of Star Wars does it remind you of? Well, that's a really good one because I've always thought that Star Wars planets kind of recapitulate what Earth was like in the past. Like Mustafar system was something like the Hadean eon. The Cryogenian, which is part of the Proterozoic when the Earth was a giant snowball, was much like ice planet Hoth. But my favorite eon being the Phanerozoic, well, if I were to pick some times to go back to see our Earth in this last few hundred millions of years, I would love to go see the Devonian around 375 million years ago and into the early Carboniferous around 350 million years ago. And that would definitely remind me of Dagobah, where I might find Yoda hanging out in a swamp. And the reason why I like the Devonian and beginning of the Carboniferous is because, quite frankly, the Devonian was the age of fishes. And you could find acanthodians, which are spiny sharks, ostracoderms, placoderms, which are these armored fish. Some of them are jawless, some of them are jawed fish. Sharks were radiating and diversifying, and there were also lots of lobe-finned fish, and as well as the first ray-finned fish as well. And terrestrial vertebrates were beginning to move on to land at that time. So that would be awesome. And of course, the other time period I'd really like to see is probably in the Cretaceous when the dinosaurs were reigning during the end of the Mesozoic. So I love that. What is my favorite eon? By far, it's the Phanerozoic. And man, I would love to see lots of the Phanerozoic, including even the Cambrian. Okay, next question. Oh, let me see. Do you ever think our sun will explode and all diversity will die? That's actually a really good question. You know, all stars in our galaxy, or every star in the universe, has a lifespan. The larger the star, the shorter the lifespan. Where really big stars, at the end of their life, they expand into a red giant, and then when they start fusing around iron, or attempt to fuse iron, they undergo this core collapse and they explode in a supernova. And the reason why my student was asking that is because I always remind our students that we are connected to the universe because it's inside of stars that carbon and nitrogen and oxygen and sodium and potassium, all these elements required for life, are made. Now, let's go on to our sun. Our sun is a medium-sized star. It's not going to explode at the end of its life. What it is going to do is it's going to expand into a red giant. And that's going to happen in a few billion years from now. So we're safe. It's not going to happen in our lifetime. But as our core collapses again and starts to fuse helium into larger elements like lithium and beryllium and carbon and oxygen, what will happen is the outer layers will expand out, will form a red giant. The Earth may or may not get engulfed by our sun, but at either rate, as the sun ages, it's going to continually warm up, and within a few billion years, the Earth is going to be pretty parched. We're going to be super hot, and there won't be any life on it. And it might hang out as microbes down in the crust for a while, but eventually our sun will shed its outer layers and will collapse into and become a dwarf star, or I think a brown dwarf is what it'll become, or it'll cool off over billions of years, and life will basically cease to exist on our planet. And we'll either have to, our descendants will have to leave or face perishment. Okay, here's another question. Are we due for a mass extinction? How will it affect humans? Well, it's not that we're ever really due for a mass extinction. They happen because of giant meteors hitting the Earth or because of increased amounts of volcanism spewing large amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere and changing climates. And some mass extinctions, we don't really know why they occurred. Something maybe changing the climate. So we're not really due for one, but we are undergoing a mass extinction. Humans are creating what is called the sixth mass extinction. Right now, our current extinction rate is, oh my gosh, it's like as much as the dinosaurs. And we're doing this through rapid climate change, rapid habitat destruction of so many areas, and polluting our environment and over harvesting things like fish and stuff like that. So, yeah, we're in a mass extinction. It will have definitely a negative effect on us. We're going to lose a lot of pristine ecosystems, and it could affect things like pollinators. Because think about this, every fruit and vegetable you eat, it's not a leaf, but like squash and watermelon and berries, we need insect pollinators to go along those flowers and pollinate them so that we can have our fruits and vegetables. So that's one aspect. If we lose some of our pollinators, it could definitely affect our food supply. So yeah, the mass extinction is going to definitely affect us a lot. Okay. This one says, I've heard about jellyfish that can restart its life cycle and can basically live forever. So is this real? And if so, how is that possible? Well, that's a pretty good question, actually. It's really weird, but like humans and most animals, we're programmed to senesce, and senescence is growing old. You can see it on my face. I got this nice gray beard, and there's my hair. We're and getting the crow lines here. We're getting old. We all age, and we're almost programmed to do that. However, there are these animals. I don't know about jellyfish in particular, but a relative of a jellyfish called a hydra basically shows no signs of senescence. And there's also some sea anemones that show no signs of senescence. What I mean by that is they don't really show any signs of aging. So their tissues are constantly renewing throughout their whole life. And yeah, we should study these animals like those hydras and some sea anemones and understand why those cells don't age. And interestingly, we could also learn a little bit from lobsters. Surprisingly, lobsters don't ever really die of old age, so to speak. They grow and they grow and they grow throughout their entire life. They have what's called indeterminate growth. So the older ones are bigger and bigger and bigger. And it takes a lot of energy for them to molt. And as they get larger, it takes more and more energy for them to molt. And they eventually can live up to about 75 years. At that point, when they try to molt, they die of exhaustion. And the reason why they don't really show any signs of aging is because at the end of their DNA, we all have these things called telomeres. And telomeres keep your DNA from unraveling at the end. It's kind of like, imagine a rope goes unraveled at the end and it ruins your rope. Well, DNA can do the same. So we have telomeres at the end of it. And you and I, our telomeres get shorter and shorter and shorter as we age. And as a result, as we get older, our DNA racks up more and more damage. And that's one aspect of the aging process. And things like lobsters actually have DNA telomerase, an enzyme that every time their cells reproduce, they reset the clock on those cells. So that is something that we should absolutely learn how to do, is how can we reset the clock and set ourselves back to a much younger place? So yeah, we're definitely studying some of these organisms to do that. Okay. This one is, do you think there's a fundamental speed limit to life's development? I don't really know, but I like the example here. Should any 4 billion-year-old planet be ready for a rapid diversification event? That's a really interesting question. In my biodiversity class, I remind everybody that the Earth is like 4.6 billion years old. But my favorite eon, the Phanerozoic, which means visible life, really didn't get started until like 542 million years ago. Now think about that. For 4.1 billion years, the Earth was mostly either lifeless or only a single-celled life, and only in the last 0.6 billion years have we had this rapid diversification, and the Earth has been covered in animal life. So why did it take so long for that to happen? And the answer is we don't really know exactly why. We do know that it took a long time for eukaryotes to evolve, and eukaryotes would not have evolved without a lot of oxygen in the atmosphere. So you had to basically evolve photosynthesis first, and that had to change the atmospheric content of oxygen enough for cellular respiration to occur. Then you had to have endosymbiosis occur to evolve so that eukaryotic cells could evolve, and eukaryotic cells had to evolve into multicellularity. We do think that there are these times in the Earth's past where the whole Earth was encapsulated as a giant snowball. We call that the snowball Earth. And this may have actually happened twice in the Earth's past, and each time they may have lasted over 100 million years, and that could have really slowed down the rate of evolution and slowed down or even stifled evolution and innovation during those time, kind of delaying the effects of the origin of multicellular life. But the reality is we don't really know why it took so incredibly long for life to evolve into multicellular organisms. It would be interesting to go out into the universe and find planets anywhere from 1 billion years old to like 8 billion years old around habitable stars and see what they evolve over time. That'd be really, really interesting. Okay, why do some organisms age? Oh, got another one about aging. Well, that's pretty cool. Like I said, we're not really sure why organisms age. Why do animals age? Some people have speculated that age is built into our genetics, which we clearly know we're programmed to grow old and die, as a function of kind of making way for the next generation so that you can have evolution. Now, that's a kind of a controversial explanation, but I do think it works. And we think that one of the reasons why us humans live a lot longer than other mammals our size is because of grandparents. Grandparents actually can help raise young babies. Anybody's ever had a kid, it takes a village to raise one kid. Two parents is very hard. But by having people live longer, we can have these grandparents stick around and help raise kids, which does impart fitness, which would encourage longevity. There are definitely specific genes in aging. Like I said, we talked about telomeres, telomerase, that are involved with like maintaining DNA. And we've also learned that as we age, there's lots of things that happen, both especially at the cellular level, things like lysosomes. These are organelles that eat other organelles inside of our cells. And as we age, lysosomes start turning over organelles much slower. So, for instance, one of the things they do is they eat your mitochondria. We all know mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cells. But as we age, the rate at which those lysosomes eat the mitochondria slows down. So what that means is you start getting all these older mitochondria in your cells that are becoming less and less efficient. You produce less ATP, you have less energy. As we get older, we slow down. And by slowing down, we don't exercise as much. So then our muscles begin to atrophy, our bone density begins to change, our brain begins to change. So like I said, there's a lot of things involved with aging there. And in fact, I probably should do a whole blog on it. There's so much to know about aging and why things change. Okay. Here's a good one. If sponges aren't animals, what do you consider them? And I do think that my next video I'm going to produce is explaining why sponges aren't animals. We've all been brought up that sponges are animals. Well, they're really not. I don't know why we've considered them to be an animal for years, but I do consider them to be a sister taxa to animals. And stay tuned, because I'm going to produce a video. My next one is going to explain why I do not consider sponges to be animals. And I'm going to lead the crusade here so that we can get that out of our textbooks and label sponges as a metazoan, which means multicellular animal, but lying outside of the kingdom of Animalia. Okay, I got my last question here. Oh, How does time and evolution and bacteria create such complex things like the brain? That's a very good question. We always say in biology that evolution just kind of blindly goes into the future. So the question is, well, okay, you've got this blind process. Well, how in the world do you keep ascending into more and more complex organisms? Why keep getting more and more complex organisms? And why eventually something as complex as the human brain? That is the most complex structure known in the known universe, is our brain. And that answer is complicated. But basically what happens, as life has evolved throughout the eons, it has grown in increasing complexity. And one of the ways that has grown into increasing complexity was the evolution of eukaryotes from the merger of two bacteria. And one of the things about eukaryotes is they don't just have a larger size to them, they have a larger genome, and they also form multicellular organisms. And by having multicellular organisms, you keep increasing in complexity because now you have cells that do different things, and you can differentiate your cells to carry these different tasks. And then you can get a lot of different animals doing a lot of different things. And in one way that animals have continually increased in complexity over the last 500 million years is we keep having these gene duplications. So for example, we have these set of genes called Hox genes. And these are like master regulatory genes. They control the activity of other genes, which means you can fine tune what your genes are doing. And the more Hox genes you have and the more genes you have in general, the more complex an organism can be. So when we get all the way up to humans, we've undergone multiple rounds of Hox gene duplications in our genome. So we have much more Hox genes. We've got I think 8 copies of Hox genes that we can fine tune our DNA with. And also, well, when it comes to humans, we also have really crazy RNAs that can not just fine tune our regulation of our DNA, but can also fine tune how the proteins are operating in our body and grow these really large brains. So humans have some unique adaptations in our gene regulation, both with increased number of Hox genes and with RNAs that allowed us to have increasing complexity. So mutations are the ultimate source of variation that have led animals to evolve, but really it's gene duplications and whole genome duplications and chromosome duplications that allowed us to become more and more complex because you keep having more and more DNA to work with. It's like having Legos, right? The more Legos I have, the more complex Lego ship I can build. Just like with animals, the more gene duplications I have, the more complex of an organism I can build. Okay, well, that's all the questions I got this week, and I haven't seen any pop up on here. If anybody had a live chat, wanted to pop in and say, I got a question, but I don't see any popping in, that's okay. And look for me next week on Ask a Scientist when I will once again answer your questions from class and other questions I get during the week. And have a good weekend.